Firstly, for the youth and family, the teens have an activity on Friday night, as well as there's a youth activity Saturday for the whole family, the parents as well. It's at 4 p.m. Just contact the Elliots if you need more information. I would imagine that in the next, weeks to come, we're going to continue to hear about people that are suffering, that are connected to our family directly, our spiritual family. So please continue to add people as we find out about them, but add David Tracy and his family, and David Tracy's cousin passed away, and as well as pray for the McDowell family. I believe that Michelle's cousin also passed away. And if you have, you're going through something, I'm sorry, we don't try to mention, obviously, people as we find out, but, let your zone leader know, or let someone in the church know. And obviously, like I said, we're not always able to be on top of everyone, but those that we are aware of, we'll make sure to be praying and, continuing to put on our prayer lists. So, we're starting a new series. Oh my goodness, you can barely see that. All right. It says his story, his story, his story. Talked about it at Sunday at Easter. And, before I get into this series or into my lesson, let's start with a definition of story here. To move beyond the pictures and the description of people. Descriptions of people. We are a picture-oriented society, social media. And you and I both know that pictures are very misleading, right? Everyone looks happy and fired up. There's no picture of me saying, hey, look at me, I'm living the mediocre life. Although that is perhaps a reality for everyone. That's not the time where you put the picture up. There's descriptions of people. And the pictures engage our eyes, the descriptions engage our ears, but the stories of people, that really engages our minds and our hearts. And that's where I want to look. I want to have three goals in this series. And one is to look at the stories of people in the Bible. And again, by stories, I mean let's look beyond the pictures and the descriptions of people and look and listen to their story. I want to cause us to examine our own stories. And then lastly is to see our stories in the context of God's larger narrative, or to see his in all this. So wanted to talk today about David and Goliath. This is an artist's rendering of David and Goliath. Obviously, everyone knows the story. The Philistines are at war with the Israelites. Philistines send a 9-foot tall dude, and his challenge is, here's our champion. You send your best guy. Whoever wins, the other guys are subject to him. And of course, nobody wants to fight a 9-foot guy, in armed combat. But this story is one of the most stories in the world of all time, perhaps the most famous. And it's something central to the human heart, right? The human experience. We love stories of triumph, of overcoming odds, and of underdogs. We love it because they give us hope. And as a dude that watches sports, in my lifetime, there's been incredible stories that live in American lore. The 1980 American Olympic hockey team, Miracle on Ice, a bunch of young amateurs defeated the Soviet national team, who have some of the best professional hockey players in the world. The Red Sox in 2004, who were down to the who beat the New York Yankees when they were down 3-0 in a best of 7. Again, we love these stories if you follow sports, because again, they give us hope. They give us hope specifically that we can overcome odds. And so I want to ask you a question as we start this off, and that is, what's something you want to do, but you could only do it with God? You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to ask you, what's something that you want to see done in your life? It's humanly possible, but you just don't think you can do it without some miraculous intervention. For me, it's certain family members that I've reached out to for decades. I've made every possible mistake with them, but also learned from that and done everything from pray, fast, have talks, back off, focus on love, focus on serving. Every platitude that you can think of for certain followers, I think I've done. And then I get to this point where I'm like, I want to see it. I know it can be done, but it can only be done with God. Or I think about the church in Detroit. We're about 250 in membership. We've got about 80 kids. We get about anywhere from 50 to 80 visitors on a Sunday. I'd love to see us be a church of 1,000. I know that can be done. I know that there's easily that many more people in the areas that we reach out to that are open, that need this. I know it can be done, but I know that I'm not going to study with 750 more people. I know it's got to be done with God. And so my question is, what's this for you? What's your Goliath? Some of you, it's overcoming sin, worry, anxiety. For some of you, it's forgiving somebody in your past. For you, it's getting open. For some of you, it's being fruitful. We're not tasked by God with defeating a 9-foot Goliath, but we all have to face giants, right? So I want to look at the story. We know we can all describe David and Goliath, but let's look a little bit behind the scenes. This is in 1 Samuel chapter 17. It says, David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are, and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Well, David's, as we know, very seriously thinking about fighting Goliath. He's finding out, well, who's going to fight this guy? And so he's asking around. But what happened is, he had several brothers, and he was the youngest. And so his oldest brother says, what are you doing here? What the heck are you doing? What about the sheep you're supposed to take care of? I'm a younger brother, so I know that when this interaction happened, the word loser or idiot was probably thrown around. What are you idiot? You fool. It's how older brothers talk to their siblings. And I guess my question is, why is this interaction here? Why is this part of the narrative? What's this got to do with him and Goliath? There were probably a million details that were going on that day, but this is what the Holy Spirit decided to jot down for us. This quick interaction, this snapshot of his interaction with his siblings. And I think it's here because a part of the narrative for our lives to defeat Goliath is overcoming at times the hurt or rejection we receive from our family, from the family that we love or that loves us. This is It's a narrative of people of God. It's part of Joseph's narrative. His brother sold him into slavery. He said, I forgive you. It's part of God's plan. There was part of a bigger story. It's part of Jesus' narrative. Read John 7. His brothers they were mocking him. They're like, yeah, hey, so you're going to be the Messiah. Why don't you go now? His younger brothers. Hey, you want to be the big shot? Go. His mother, Jesus' own mother, tried to take charge of him. Read it. Read about it. It's in Mark 3. He doesn't mention it a lot. We just get a verse, and I think it's because people that overcome things don't talk about it a lot. They mention it, or it has to be drawn out. It's like clues that they leave. I know a guy that leads a church in the Midwest. He battles. You wouldn't know it. If you ask him, he'll tell you. He might share it if it's helpful, but he doesn't talk about it. He's an overcomer, and he told me how he overcomes through worship, and it used to be terrible for him, but now can manage it. And he says it doesn't hit him over more than a few minutes now. I know another church leader's got a learning disability. When I tell people, they're shocked. He's not trying to hide it. It's part of his narrative. It's part of what he had to overcome. It's not just Joseph and Jesus, and it's not just siblings. It can be spouse. Ezekiel's wife died, and God said, I want you to keep carrying on. Hosea, you read the story of Hosea. Married prostitute, had to keep loving and forgiving her. You read about Abigail, was married to a fool. This is part of our narrative. This is part of David's story. This is part of our story. I'm going to share a little video from one of our house church leaders, a sister that is dearly loved, Christy Krozik. Apologize for the lighting. Not sure how to fix it, but we're going to play it here.
My name is Christy Krozik. My husband's name is Kevin. We have the privilege of leading a house church here in Detroit. We have an active and zealous 5-year-old son named Lincoln, who keeps us very busy and exhausted. I'm currently a stay-at-home mom and a wife. Prior to having my son, I worked as a counselor for men and children. Rewind 30 years, and I was one of 7 children in my family. My own family, some issues, alcoholism. My parents divorced during my adolescence. At that point, I had already started pouring myself into academics, sports, and boys. I wanted to make a name for myself and forget everything behind me. I graduated from high school, and I was headed to Eastern Michigan University. I was on the road to self-indulgence with drinking and men. With God's intervention, one of my coworkers invited me to church. After avoiding him for 3 months, I was ready to come to church after desolate circumstances. My heart was open to changing my life in a greater cause. I fell in love with God and His people. I was able to heal from my life before Jesus and my poor choices. Thank you so much for listening to my story. God bless.
I think when we hear people's stories, more often than not, we're what people have gone through. We wouldn't have guessed, and it's because people are able to overcome. David said in his response to his brother, he said, "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can I even speak?" Then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. This is his response to his older brother, and he says, "Now what have I done?" You know what that tells me? That this type of patronizing, discouraging, disrespectful interaction from his brothers probably happened a lot, right? Younger brother. So he's like, now what have I done? In other words, I know I'm always doing something wrong in your eyes. I think if David's here and we interview him and we go, hey, David, like, how hard was it initially being king with your brothers? He'd have been like, oh, you know, he would have a story to tell. He would have a story to tell, as most of us do, right? Let's carry on in this story. This is David going to Saul. He said, Saul replied, you're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. The story of David's triumph over Goliath, it's not about a miraculous intervention by God. It starts with him herding sheep. That's when it started. Here's the truth in life. Glorious moments always have inglorious beginnings. Glorious moments always have inglorious beginnings. This is something to understand in regards to our narrative, our story. There are things in our story that are very difficult to understand why they have occurred. But one of the things that's obvious about David is before he was a conqueror, he was a shepherd. And I don't know if you guys know what a slingshot back in those days was not one of those wise slingshots where you pull back a rubber band and let it go. It was like this leather whip where you'd whip it around, and these things would be incredibly powerful weapons, actually, that at close range a slingshot slung by somebody with skill would hit with the same force of a 45. You can imagine David literally hours as a teenage boy. They didn't have internet, they didn't have whatever then, so they didn't have TV, so he spent his hours shepherding the sheep, and he probably killed time practicing his slingshot. Just practicing in that sling until he got super accurate with it, and of course when the bear and the lion came, it was something where they could be 100 yards out and he could hit him accurately. And so when Goliath had come, well, God had prepared him. This is what it says in Ephesians chapter 2. It says, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do what? Good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Narrative, okay? Understanding your narrative is first about understanding where you fit in God's narrative. And this is something that's so important, because the Bible says that you were created to do good works, and that God had prepared in advance for you to do that. A Christian's life is not about fulfillment or self-preservation. It is about serving and stewardship. That's God's story. And your story fits into his story. Understanding the purpose of why something is created helps bring and illuminate understanding to just the entire nature of it, right? To understand the form, you got to understand the function. Why does a car have a steering wheel? Well, duh. Because it's meant to drive. Why doesn't a car have a swimming pool in it? Because you wouldn't be able to drive with this one. It's just, it would impede the original intent and function of that car. Understanding why you were created. You were created to serve and to steward. Our children were not created so that I could get fulfillment out of them. I could be, oh, one day they're going to win an Academy Award and mention me. That's what. They're there so that God gave me these incredible souls that I can be stewards of them, and hopefully that they will make decisions to go back to Him. But everything's about serving and stewardship if you take the narrative up looking at God's story. So let's look back here. Let's look at just a little snapshot of David. We know the story, but I wanted to look at some in-between, behind-the-scene conversations. David's story is he had to contend with the stigma of being a guest. He was relegated to shepherd work. But all of this is his narrative to help him to be a conqueror and a king. You know, I think about my story, right? I for those of you, most of you know, I grew up working in a restaurant. And customers yell at me. I didn't have their burger right. But I believe that God was preparing me for the disposition of it, one day helping and leading and dealing and helping other people. So now what's your story? What giant are you facing? What is God putting you through? And are you embracing it? Your struggle is a part of your triumph. You see, God uses weakness. We know this about God. We tell other people this, but we won't often hear it. God uses weakness to accomplish His purpose. We just heard Christy Krozik share her testimony. What was it a testimony of? Her weakness. How things are messed up in our lives. How it's not the perfect life. But God uses that story. Your weakness is either being used or you're using it as an excuse. Your weakness is why you serve, or it's why you can't serve. Your weakness is why you serve, or why you can't serve. Your weakness is something that becomes your excuse, or it becomes something that God uses. You are being used or excused. You are your situation and your testimony, or it's the reason why you bow out of things. It's the reason you're shady. It's the reason why you don't come to things. It's the reason why you go, yeah, I got this thing. I can't come. I can't do that. God's narrative, His story is to use our weakness. He uses it to tell His story. And if to church, I want you to look at it. You do know the church, a connection. We've got a ton of house churches that are willing people of stand by with people. But what we can overcome is by living narrative. Living God's narrative of our life. So let's close in prayer and we'll be. And thank you for your story. Thank you for the perspective that you give us, that you help us to see our lives not about some selfish fulfillment, but about really the inspiring task of being used by you to help others. I pray every person that's hearing this lesson, that's connected right now, that you help fill our hearts, help our story, help us to surrender our story to be a part of your story. We love you, God. We thank you. Use us in our weakness, and not to be an excuse.